What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Harrison, and we're gonna do another reaction video, but it's gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna kind of pause the video whenever I feel like making like a point or discussing a point that someone's trying to make. But I noticed on Twitter earlier, and I don't usually have a problem with IGN. I don't now, but I'm very curious to see what this video is about. So let me just pull up the tweet, and then we'll watch the YouTube video. So the tweet is Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. So the answer is not to remake, but to rewrite. I don't understand what they mean, and that's why I do want to watch this video to get a little bit more context. But a remaster, right, is where you take the same exact game, maybe you modernize the controls a little bit, make the graphics better, stuff like that. Traditionally, there's not a lot of like heavy lifting that developers are doing, such as like a remake, stuff like Resident Evil 4 remake, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Dead Space, stuff like that, where you're putting a lot into it, and especially like Resident Evil 4. They did a lot of changes to that game, and I guess I really should have said especially Dead Space, because the original Dead Space, you had to use the train to go through each area of the ship. In Dead Space remake, they actually made it to where you can walk seamlessly through the ship at the point in the story where you can do so. So they really did a lot of extra stuff in the Dead Space remake. So let's watch it and just gain that context, and we'll go from there.
With Resident Evil 4's release last year,
All right, let's
Capcom's
go
project
ahead
to remake
and
the glory
check
years
this
of
out.
its survival horror series is complete. But as the game's post-credit scene suggests, the remakes aren't over. And so the big question is, where next? The obvious answer is a remake of Resident Evil 5. But on the game's 15th anniversary, it's clear that moving forward chronologically will take Capcom's remakes into the series' weakest era. An era of gameplay and narrative decisions best
Yeah,
left in the past. Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. And so the answer
I just
is
don't
not
agree
to
with that.
remake,
I think you can
but to
definitely
rewrite.
you can remake it and remake it better. You don't have to completely rewrite the whole game, but we'll see what they have to say.
Resident Evil is a survival horror series. Not that you'd know that playing Resident Evil 5. Sure, it features a constant flow of horrific imagery, but Resident Evil 5 is an action game through and through. That's evident in its cover shooter mechanics, vehicle chases with on-rails turret sequences, and the constant rattle of assault rifles. Even its visual design evokes the sandy shades of modern military games that experience mass popularity
Yeah, I do.
in the
If
late
they do remake it, I do
2000s.
want them to
It
get
all
rid of
speaks
that
to a
like
series
greenish
that had
tint they
lost its
had
way. Rather
over the
than
game.
reflect on the tenets that were
That
the
definitely needs to
foundation of
go
its
for sure.
experience, Resident Evil 5 looked to the contemporary gaming zeitgeist in an attempt to find a new lease of life. The result is an unholy hybrid of Resident Evil, Gears of War, and Call of Duty. It's as ugly and unwieldy as it sounds. This design appears to not just be a misguided attempt to follow Western successes, but also a misreading of its predecessor. With Resident Evil 4, director Shinji Mikami deftly reinvented the series through the use of a new over-the-shoulder camera angle. The perspective allowed
But
for
see,
a more
I would say that with Resident Evil 4, they really kind of. I mean, Resident Evil 4 is definitely a survival horror game, but it's not on the same level as like 1, 2, and 3 survival horror. It's definitely a way more actiony. And yes, while I think the games did get worse after Resident Evil 4, like 5 is still really good. And to be honest, like playing that with co-op with a friend is some of the most fun I've ever had. A, playing a Resident Evil game, and B, just playing co-op in general. I remember getting the game like on a Tuesday, um, or whenever it released, and then yeah, I think it was a Tuesday because I think it was during the summer when I was out of school, and me and my buddy played through it like within 2 nights. Like we had such a good time with it, and it has pretty good replayability. So yeah, I think it was on that path to be more actiony, for better or for worse.
kinetic, action-heavy game. Despite this, Mikami never lost sight of the terror at the core of Resident Evil. Through the use of enemies that were strategically placed to provide undulating waves of tension and fear, and the inclusion of Ashley as your vulnerable charge, combat encounters were focused on surviving overwhelming horrors rather than dominating foes. Resident Evil 5, meanwhile, presents its enemies as waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry. Their purpose is cannon fodder, a wall of meat to slow your progress through levels. And those levels are not locations to be explored. Instead, they are largely funnels that push you from entrance to exit. Resident Evil 4 may have replaced the series' traditional continuous structure with discrete levels in an attempt to move away from the backtracking-heavy design of previous games, but it preserved the spirit of locations like the Raccoon City police station. The village, Salazar's castle, and the island feature interlocking, explorable pathways that solidify these locations as authentic spaces rather than obstacle courses. Resident Evil 5 has no interest in this,
That's true. I do agree with that. Because thinking back right now, I can't particularly remember any area of Resident Evil 5 other than like that starting area where you first kind of come across the I know it's not Las Plagas, but you know what I mean. Whenever you first when you come across the first enemy, yeah, I can't remember any other area. So that does make sense in that regard. That it's just kind of funneling you through the game. There's not really much exploration. I mean, there is some sort of exploration because they hide treasures and stuff, but it's not quite on the par as with Resident Evil 4's exploration.
Their lack of authenticity means no one will ever mention the Kajuju Autonomous Zone in the same breath as the Spencer Mansion. All this is to say that a faithful remake of Resident Evil 5 would break Capcom's 7-year streak of brilliant survival horror games. It's telling that the series' reset point, Resident Evil 7, was a reinvention of the very first.
But see, I don't think if Capcom's gonna remake 5, I don't think they're gonna just keep it the same. I think they're gonna redo it, maybe make it more, um, survival horror than the typical Resident Evil 5 that we're used to. I don't know. I trust Capcom. Like Capcom is one of outside of like From. I think Capcom is one of my favorite developers. They've kind of really nailed every single Resident Evil project they've done in a long time. I mean, maybe like I don't know, maybe like Resident Evil 3 was like maybe the weakest because they cut out a portion of the game and it was a really fast game to get through, but which I kind of enjoyed because I replayed that game like 4 or 5 times. But I don't see why this game would be so difficult that they can't remake it. I don't agree with that yet. Unless he makes a valid point. I just think Capcom would redo it right and make it more scarier or less enemies, make them stronger, something like that.
First game, a haunted house that grew ever larger as you unlocked new rooms by solving its puzzles. Clever reinventions of this base
Resident Evil
conceit
7 was
is the
so
key
good.
to Resident
God, it
Evil's
was so good.
success. Be that dropping an unstoppable force into the house's corridors, such as Resident Evil 2's Mr. X, or expanding the scope of the house. Resident Evil Village's titular location is effectively a giant manor. Its corridors are streets, and its rooms are houses. Resident Evil 5's stage-driven structure is simply inferior to this design. A modern recreation of it would only further highlight its flaws, especially coming in such close proximity to masterclasses like the remake of Resident Evil 2. Remakes can, of course, completely redefine the structure of their source material. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, is recognisably an updated version of the classic RPG, but its world design and gameplay mechanics are a world apart from the 1997 original.
Yeah,
so
and I
you
think they
argue
could
that
make some of those
Resident Evil 5
areas
is
a lot
actually the
bigger and a lot
Resident Evil
more
most in need
explorable
of a remake. A
if
whole
they
new
want to,
environmental
and I
structure
think they
scenario
probably will.
design that reins in the action and dials up the horror would bring it in line with Capcom's other remakes. But all of this doesn't account for Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem: racism.
Oh my god. I knew it was coming. Oh goodness. Oh, IGN, I love you guys so much. I remember back in the day, it was the look, racism is horrible. It's a terrible thing. But where's the game set in? It's set in Africa. There are white people in Africa, yes, but the majority are black people. We'll see what he has to say, but I didn't see anybody having an issue with Resident Evil 4 where it was, Leon, a white guy, coming in and killing a bunch of Hispanic people, or Latino people, right? Um, so I we'll just see what he has to say.
Set in a fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. Yes, it's technically the Ouroboros virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting, but the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before their infection. Intentionally or not, Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent, an uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down via Western intervention in the name of global security. This insensitive treatment of people of colour was hotly debated even as early as Resident Evil 5's debut trailer, with writers such as Ngai Kroll and Stephen Totillo
I just don't understand that. Like, Resident Evil 4, you go to the village where they're more or less primitive. They don't have the modern technology. They have a castle and stuff. Like, so I'm failing to see the difference. Other than,
uncomfortable post-colonial imagery. The arguments and think pieces continued well into the game's release window, with IGN's own former editor-in-chief Hilary Goldstein having also wrestled with the subject. But that was 2009, a time when race was apparently a debate rather than a reality. In the 2020s, in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game. No.
It's set in Africa. I just don't.
Remakes may be able to redefine their source material, but there's only so many changes you can make until it's not a remake at all, but an entirely new game. And if you take Africa out of Resident Evil 5, is it Resident Evil 5 anymore? Even with a vastly improved, more sensitive take on the continent, perhaps one with a black protagonist and a more empathetic look at the outbreak, the experience would simply be too divorced from the original to hold the name Resident Evil 5. So where does Capcom go now? Personally, I'd look backwards. Code Veronica is an ideal candidate, as is the original Resident Evil. But if the only way is chronologically forward, then a total rewrite of what comes next is the logical path. Because what followed Resident Evil 4 was
I'm curious to see what the comments
game,
are going to say after this.
Resident Evil 6 doubled down, tripled down on the action-packed, set-piece heavy shooter design.
Yeah, I've never actually finished Resident Evil 6. I thought it was just that terrible.
Were it not for the monsters. Its restrictive level design practically puts you in a chokehold, forcing you to endure a barrage of bombastic moments that have no interest in evoking any sense of fear. Resident Evil 6 is a survival horror, only in that it's a horrible game that you have to survive playing. But this time around, it doesn't have to be like that.
Was it that bad?
Capcom
I
now
don't know.
has the opportunity to ignore the past and completely reinvent this chunk of the timeline. In Resident Evil 4 Remake's post-credit scene, evil mastermind Albert Wesker details his plans for world domination to Ada Wong. Reflected in his glasses is an image of Excella Gione and the Stairway of the Sun, two significant plot elements from Resident Evil 5, which indicates Capcom's intentions. But there's more to consider. This scene is largely a replication of the sequence from Assignment Ada, a non-canon chapter from the original Resident Evil 4. Its shift from unofficial to canon points to a willingness to change. Furthermore, the end of this scene is completely rewritten. When learning of Wesker's plans, rather than dutifully deliver the stolen Las Plagas sample to him, Ada betrays her shadowy boss and forces her helicopter to turn around. In this moment,
really like
the future of Resident
DLC.
Evil becomes unclear.
Good.
Capcom has given itself the freedom to do whatever it wants. I just hope it's not a remake of Resident Evil 5. For more on how Capcom is altering the series,
I knew they were going to go in that direction. I just knew it. I just wanted to watch it first and to see. Because up until then, I was like, I'm not really seeing the point of making this video until they started talking about racist stuff. Let's check out the comments. I'm curious. So Spanish people living. Let me zoom in real quick. So Spanish people living like it's the Middle Ages was okay in RE4, but doing the similar depiction of Africa is in RE5 is not okay. IGN, go to the Congo for a month and see how your statements hold up. RE4 Spaniard enemies, IGN thumbs up. RE5 African enemies, IGN thumbs down. Y'all still have time to delete this video. It's in Africa, the RE series. It's been in Antarctica. It's been in Spain, Midwest. It wasn't racist then. Why should it be racist now? It's in Africa. Have fun with the game. Play the game. If the Spanish had no problem with it, why would Africa? There was nothing problematic about RE5. Just stop. Capcom, watch me. So, okay. All right. So I feel like I'm not just being an asshole then. So zombies should be what in Africa? Irish. Yeah, okay. I'm not just being an asshole. Because I'll be very quick to just be like, I don't agree with that. And when I saw the Twitter post, I was like, where are they gonna go with this? Is just a way to bring Resident Evil 5 up? Because I remember the whole racist stuff back in the day. And I think even Capcom went in and added more like white zombies, I guess, to try to appease people, and that's fine, but I mean the game's in Africa. I don't know why IGN has to do this kind of stuff. They do it all the time. But yeah, I think Resident Evil 5 can be remade, not rewritten. I think it can be remade. I think they can make the story better. They can make some of those the really linear levels, they can maybe flesh them out a little bit to whether you can explore more. I don't see why that would be a difficult thing to do. But to just take it out completely out of Africa and change locations, that doesn't make any sense to me. So, well, hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a fun one, and I knew exactly where it was going. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Comment below what you guys think of that video, if you agree with me or not. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank y'all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. I'll let YouTube algorithm pick one of my videos below for you guys to watch. Give it a click, and I hope you enjoy. And I will see you in the next video.